The first step in the project is to take your photocopy of the grid and cut all of the white borders off. You want to be very careful when you're cutting to not cut off the black line. So you're going to cut right next to that black line. These excess pieces can be used as measuring sticks. Probably not this one though. Then you're going to take your photocopy and you're going to stick your photocopy underneath the grid. And you want to line it up in some sort of corner that you're going to draw. So you're going to draw everything that ends up being where this grid is, and you're not drawing anything that falls outside of the grid. So if I put it in this top right-hand corner, I want to look at what I want to be drawing and if the composition looks nice. So if I have it in the right-hand corner, I get all of her hair. If I put it over in the left-hand corner, it kind of cuts off some of the shape of the hair, and I want to keep this shape intact. So I'm going to choose to put mine in the top right-hand corner. You might put yours in the top left-hand corner, depending on what your photo looks like. Then you are going to trace around the border. You can do this with pencil or pen, might stand out a little bit better. I don't really need to trace up this side because it's already defined for me, but if you have a white border, see how it kind of gets a little bit more white here? I could go ahead and go up this side if I wanted to. So when in doubt, draw your lines all the way around. Then you're going to take each one of these grid lines and you're going to transfer them. So the way you transfer is you take this line and you go straight up. What you don't want to do is take it and go at an angle. So I am going to do this on every single side. I'm going to extend the lines out very carefully. And I don't want this paper to move at all. So hold it still and then go all the way around. If it moves, you need to reline these up before you continue to trace. Then you're going to take a ruler and you're going to line up the marks and draw the lines. Make sure that when you're lining up the first mark and then you go to line up the second mark, that the first mark didn't get unaligned. And so to do this, I just put my pencil on the first mark, push the bottom of the ruler up on that edge, and then at the top, I line up the top mark. I double check, are they still lined up? Be very careful with this, and draw the line. If you're missing the marks at the bottom, you have to have those. If you don't have 2 marks, your lines will be all crooked by the time that you're done. You also want to make sure when you're doing this that you're holding the ruler firmly so it doesn't slip as you're drawing the line down. If you're having a hard time seeing what's happening underneath because your photocopy might be dark, that's when you just do the same thing, but maybe with a blue or a red pen or any type of colored pen, because it will stand out just a little bit more this way. Now it's very hard to see the marks going down this side, but they're there. They're glossy because I have them in pencil, so really look hard for those. And again, line up the 2 marks, not just one, so it's lined up. And draw all your horizontal marks. Remember, anything that falls outside of this is not going to be drawn, so all of this is not going to be something I transfer onto my drawing paper. My photo is a little bit short, and so this square, in order to complete it, this is imagined space, so when I draw, I am going to extend what I see out, and I imagine what the shading would look like here. So this is going to be part of my drawing, but I have to imagine what would go there. Then you can go ahead and put ABCs across the top, 1, 2, 3s down the side. Remember, this little piece is not going to be part of my artwork because it's not even a full square. So my A is going to start off in that first full square. If you're doing a landscape style portrait, you're going to go past J. Once this is completed, you're going to take out your drawing paper, make sure that you don't wrinkle it, and try not to get any oils on it. What you're going to do is you're going to slide the grid underneath so that the grid side, the dark lines, are facing upwards behind your drawing paper. And then you're going to flip it. Then you're going to get it nice and centered. You're going to get a piece of tape, and I like to divide it down the middle because we don't have that much room here. And you don't want to tape it this way because when you start shading, you'll see a bump show from where the thickness of the tape is. So we want the tape to be barely at the edge, hanging onto the paper. So again, down here, the tape is barely hanging onto the edge. Have it as low as I can possibly go. Then you flip this over. Then I want to transfer the border from where this grid is showing through. And so in the corners of the grid that's taped on, I'm going to mark a dot. Make sure that you're being very careful with this. So you can see how the dot is right at the corner of that grid. Then I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to connect these dots. And then I'm going to write the alphabet and the numbers just like how I have it on my reference photo. So A is going to go there. Go ahead and put the alphabet and the numbers. Make sure that they are right in the center of the squares. So the next thing you want to do is pre-plan out where you're going to measure and plot. I like to use a bright colored marker to put my dots, and I make sure that my dots are really small. And you could use a number 2 pencil if you want, but those dots won't really show up very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge of the contour of the face, so the contour of this form, and I am going to put a dot all the way down everywhere it crosses on a line. So that the edge of the nose crosses here, it crosses here, it crosses here, and everywhere there is the edge of a form going across the line, that is where I'm going to put a dot. I'm going to do the same thing for the hair. So the major parts of the hair, where is it crossing on these lines? And so on. The other thing you want to mark is where the ends of things are, or where things turn sharply, or where they collide into something else. So when I say the end of something, I would mean like the end of this crease is right here. That is not crossing over any of these grid lines, and it's just kind of hanging out in the center of the square. So I'm also marking those. So everywhere the form crosses on a line and the ends of something. I also have another end down here of this crease. There aren't very many ends of things. The end of the corner of the eye is important. That's not exactly on the line, it's down a little bit farther. I would mark the end of the eyebrow. This is a pretty good corner to put a dot on. Here's a corner to put another dot on. So wherever something collides or a corner, those are good to know. So once we have the dots planned out, we can go ahead and start measuring and plotting. And so what we're going to need are a couple of measuring sticks and a number 2 pencil. You wouldn't want to do this with anything like an ebony pencil because that would be too dark. We want to measure and plot these dots onto our drawing paper, and we want the dots to be small, and we want it to be light, and same thing when we're drawing the lines, we want everything to be light. You also want to have some sort of separator paper for underneath your hand so your oils don't get on the paper. If you have to erase at all, you want to erase very lightly, because if you rough up the surface of the paper, when you start to shade, it's going to look like a completely different texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure where each of these dots are, and I'm going to put it onto my drawing paper. The end result is going to look like this, where you can see all of the dots that I plotted and all the contour lines. So really see how lightly I did this, how small the dots are, how light the dots are, and that's what our goal is going to be. Instead of trying to do this demonstration on this paper because it's very hard for you to see the grid, I'm going to do it on tracing paper. I want you to imagine that I'm not doing it on tracing paper, I'm doing it on the regular white paper like you, but just pretend that this is a thick white paper. I have my separator paper underneath my hand. And there are a couple of different types of dots. So you have the dots that are on the lines, and you have the dots that are inside of the squares. If you're measuring a dot that is on a line, you only have to measure the distance one way. If the dot is in the middle of the square, you have to measure how high up and how far in it is. Now this is a one-to-one relationship, so we don't have to double or triple the size of anything. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to figure out where I'm at. I'm in F, and you can start anywhere you want on the page. I'm just going to start here. I'm going to start on the line in box F6, and it's at the bottom of the box. So F6, I'm going to just put a very small little mark just to get started. Eventually, it's not going to be so confusing once you have more on the paper. I'm going to take my measuring stick, and I'm going to always put the tip of the paper on the dot. I have it lined up on this line, and I'm going to mark the grid line, the vertical grid line. Then I am going to come over here, and I'm going to just reline it back up on the horizontal line, and my mark was on the vertical line, so that's where I want it to be. And then I'm going to put my dot right at the tip again, because I know the dot was at the tip, so I'm going to put it back at the tip. So let me zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. Okay. So I put the tip of the paper on the dot, I marked the grid line, and then I'm taking note of where do I have it lined up, and I just reline it up in the same exact location, and the dot is going to be at the tip. Then I'm going to move on down to the next line down below. I am going to put the tip of the paper on the dot. I'm going to mark the edge of the box, and then I'm going to reline up the edge of the box. And wherever the tip is, that's where my dot is. Notice how light I'm doing my dots. You can go even lighter, even smaller, even better. And then once you have the two dots, you can play connect the dots. So I'm not going to just go with a straight line. I'm going to look at that subtle curve. And then I can work my way up to the next contour that's crossing. And we have one here. This one's on the vertical line, so I put the tip of the paper on the dot. I mark the box. Pay attention to where I'm lining this up next to. So I'm lining it up next to this line. Make sure you're pretty accurate. The dot was at the tip. And then I can draw that curve. A way to double check if you're accurate with this or not is to look at the negative space. So I look at this shape. Does this shape look like that shape, or does it look too skinny or too wide? So it looks good. Then I'm going to look at this kind of curved triangle, and that looks good too. So I'd always go back and I'd look at my negative space to see how accurate I am. Another way to check for accuracy is to take your reference photo and carefully line it back up so the grid is directly over the drawing. This would be easier if I cut this edge off and this bottom edge off so I can line it up better, but if you flip it back and forth really fast, you should be able to tell what's wrong with your drawing if you look at all the different pieces as you do this. The other thing that you'd be measuring and plotting are the dots that are somewhere inside of the square. So instead of just measuring one distance, like the ones that are on the grid lines, you have to measure the two ways. So I'll show you that right now. You put the tip of the paper on the dot, you mark the edge of the box, and make sure that your paper is nice and straight. It's not at an angle or anything like that. And then you reline it back up in the right square, so you find the right square. So I'm in this square, and the mark is lined up at the bottom line. So I'm going to reline it up at the bottom line, and I know that the dot was somewhere about this high, but I have to extend that dot horizontal because I was measuring from this horizontal line. And then I'm going to measure how far in it is. Tip of the paper on the dot, mark the edge of the box, reline it back up on the same line, and then the dot was at the tip of the paper, but now I have to extend that dot out parallel to what I measured from, so that's a vertical line. And wherever they cross, that's right where that dot would be. So remember, as you're doing this, that you have the separator paper under your hand, and that you're measuring and plotting these dots lightly, and you're drawing the contours super light. I would say like a light value 1 or even lighter, so you can barely see these lines.